this session. So we are recording this session, so it'll be available afterwards. Feel free to use the chat feature if you have any questions, and we're going to go and dive in with first, just to do a presentation of the state and tribal survey results. So I'd like to open up with Paige Schmidt, who's the Indigenous Knowledge and Co-Stewardship Coordinator over at U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. Paige, take it away.
Thanks, Jason. Let me see if I can get this to screen share the right way. Okay, do I need to swap screens? Are you seeing the primary screen or the notes?
Swap the screens.
Okay.
There you go.
Excellent. All right, thank you. So Mark should have sent you a document that we put together, Perspectives on Involuntary Guidance for Improving Tribal Engagement in State Wildlife Action Plan. So hopefully you had a chance to look that over, and I'm just going to go over it very briefly. So of course, we're all here because of element 7, which indicates that in developing and currently revising your state wildlife action plans, that you should be engaging with Indian tribes in that revision process. So we wanted to find out a little bit about how that process has worked in the past. So we sent a survey to the State Wildlife Action Plan coordinators in April of 2022. And it was a series of 5 questions, and I won't get into the specifics of the questions. The responses were anonymous, and we received 28 responses, and we can't attribute the responses to a state unless the individual provided something in the response that gave us some indication of where they worked. 74% of respondents indicated tribal engagement was insufficient. Most respondents indicated their state treated tribes the same as any other stakeholder. Many wanted to do more to engage tribes, but didn't know how to proceed. There was some limited engagement. Some states limited their engagement to federally recognized tribes. And some states recognized that there were barriers to tribal engagement, whether that was a lack of capacity on their end or from the tribe's perspective, and that there was also a lack of trust that served as a barrier. So we followed up with a survey of similar questions to tribal natural resource staff sent out via the Native American Fish and Wildlife Society via a listserv that they maintain. Again, the responses were anonymous, so we didn't know which tribe a response was attributable to or which state they were necessarily talking about. We received 22 responses, and 89% felt that their tribe was not adequately engaged in swap development or implementation. There was a general lack of communication, and several respondents indicated they have zero communication from their state counterparts in the previous versions of their swaps. Many individuals indicated that they weren't sure if their tribal or their state counterpart knew who to contact or if the tribal council had been contacted. There was a perceived lack of understanding, appreciation, and respect for tribes, and many indicated that they felt that they had been treated just like any other stakeholder. Many indicated that they wanted to be included earlier in the process so that their opinion and reviews could be substantive and incorporated into the upcoming swap revisions. So based on these findings, we tried to put together some guidance that is also within the document that you were sent out to try to help improve tribal engagement in the forthcoming swap revisions. So I'm just going to kind of go over some of these very briefly. So the first one is to define the decision-making space before you engage with tribes. You need to define each tribe's role in your swap process, including how tribal priorities will be addressed, if and how Indigenous knowledge will inform your swap, and how tribes will influence decision-making. Before you contact tribes, you need to get permission from your department head or another appropriate entity to endorse tribal engagement and their role in your swap process. You need to identify the tribal contacts in your state. It's important to understand how many tribes are located in your state and who the contacts are for those tribes. In the document, we provide several resources that you can use to do this. If you do not have a local tribe with land, reservation, or jurisdiction within your state, identify which tribes were removed from your state and contact them. Those are there, they still have ancestral homelands and they still have an interest in what happens in their ancestral homelands. Definitely engage with tribes before you begin revision of your SWAP. Meaningful engagement is going to require trust, relationship building, and time. Begin outreach with tribes at least 1 year or more before you begin your SWAP revision. Don't just send a letter to begin engagement. Meet with your tribal representatives at a place and time of their convenience. If you do have to rely on a phone call or a virtual meeting, it's less preferred by tribal representatives and it's less effective in establishing new relationships. If you don't receive an immediate response, don't take it as a lack of interest. They're probably just busy and having to do other things. And as much as you think that your departments are underfunded and that you lack capacity, I guarantee you the problem is potentially much more dire with your tribal counterparts. Also, ask each tribe how they would like to participate in the best form of communication. You can also convene meetings to identify common goals and opportunities throughout the SWAP process and other opportunities to develop these important relationships. Be sure that you honor tribes as sovereigns and not as stakeholders. They are not stakeholders and they should not be treated as such. If possible, invite tribal staff to serve as a member of the core planning team of your SWAP. And consider defining or formalizing a tribe's involvement through a memorandum of understanding or a similar process. Be respectful of the time you ask of tribal representatives, value their opinions, and check with them to ensure they feel heard and that the commitment of their time is serving the tribe and you. If you can, provide funding or support capacity when you engage with tribes. They may have a desire to participate, but staffing or funding might be limiting. So consider ways you can compensate tribal representatives for their time and their expense, such as providing for mileage or per diem. Be flexible when you schedule meetings and discussions with tribes, including flexibility in formats for providing and discussing tribal priorities. This will help ensure the tribes are best able to provide input. Consider tribal election cycles and cultural priorities that could prevent tribal officials and staff from participating in meetings and or meeting timeframes for providing input. If possible, build these timeframes into your SWAP revision timeframe. Be sincere about including tribal priorities. Expect that tribes will have priorities that you do not know how to incorporate into your SWAP revision and have a plan with options for how to accommodate their priorities. For example, a tribe may want the plan to include a culturally important species that does not meet your state's definition for a species of greatest conservation need. Determine what options are available before you begin this process and ask your tribal partners how they think these species should be included. Element 1 does allow some latitude for a state to include culturally significant species that may not be rare or declining. Consider asking tribes which species are important to them and discuss whether or not those species could be included in your SWAP. If a tribe identifies a species that is of significance to them that you absolutely cannot include in your SWAP, identify other opportunities that the species or the tribe's priorities can be addressed. Be open to the use of Indigenous knowledge and seek guidance from the tribe or tribes that are holders of this knowledge and owners of this knowledge, and be respectful in how it should be used. Be sure to gain their permission before accessing or using it, and practice reciprocity when seeking Indigenous knowledge. Oftentimes people go to tribes and they want their information, but they don't ever reciprocate, nor do they communicate how that information was used, nor do they take the appropriate steps necessary to protect that information. Practicing reciprocity is a form of showing good faith that you are going to do right by the knowledge and the knowledge holders, and also providing just compensation for the individuals that hold it. Don't be constrained by element 7. It sets a minimum criteria for the SWAP, and you can go above and beyond this. So there isn't prohibition for engaging with, in addition to federally recognized tribes, to also engaging with state recognized tribes, tribes without formal federal or state recognition, tribes that have ancestral connections to your state, and Indigenous peoples not affiliated with a tribe. Hire professional help for consulting and training. Trained consultants can offer guidance, and they can also facilitate engagement with tribes. Also consider hiring a tribal liaison, or see if your state already has a tribal liaison on staff that could assist with your swap. Finally, don't promise what you can't deliver. Spend time listening and learning. Relationship building is key, so it is important to learn cultural, protocol, treaty rights, and other key details before engaging with tribes to ensure you have successful connections. Learn about the history between your state's government and each tribe you are engaging. Recognize that strained relationships are caused by historical racial tension from state citizens to state citizens that are also members of a tribe and directly towards tribal governments. This isn't a pleasant issue, but acknowledgement goes a long way towards reconciliation, and sincere apologies, especially if provided directly from a state, go even further. So just to summarize, if you want to proactively engage with tribes, we're recommending that you build relationships at least 1 year before the swap revision process begins. If you've already started, that's okay, start now. You can engage with all tribes, and it's really important to define the decision-making space, including how tribal priorities will be addressed, if and how Indigenous knowledge will inform your swap, and how tribes will influence decision-making. The document provides additional perspective, so we encourage additional information, so we encourage you to read it. It provides links for potential resources, a few examples of training opportunities that you might want to avail yourself of, as well as Appendix 1, which is essentially a worksheet with questions that will help you think through this process and essentially develop a draft of a tribal engagement plan. So with that, I will stop sharing and turn it over to the next presenter. Thank you.
Hey, thank you, Paige. And as I put in the chat, if you didn't see it, please feel free to put any questions into the chat and we will ask them during the Q&A. I've seen 2 already that we'll make sure we come back to. So next up, for our next speaker, we want to dive into 2 case studies, actually hear how this is happening on the ground. So first is Mike Lavoie, Natural Resources Manager from the Eastern Band of Cherokee Indians. Mike, thanks again for your time.
Sure. Let me try to share my screen here. Let's see. Does that work?
So we see the main PowerPoint. Yep, there we go. You're good.
Okay, great.
Thank you.
Well, good afternoon. Thank you, everybody, for the opportunity to be here today. Again, my name is Mike Lavoie. I'm the Natural Resources Director for the Eastern Band of Cherokee Indians. I also currently serve on the board of directors for the Native American Fish and Wildlife Society. It's good to be here to share our unique Cherokee story and our relationship with North Carolina. Again, though, I wanted to make sure I made this disclaimer clear that I'm speaking today on behalf of our experience. There's 574 federally recognized tribes in the country, and each tribe has its unique history and political relationship with states that makes partnerships, challenging at times. So again, hopefully we can take a few things from what we've learned from our many successes with the state of North Carolina, and hopefully that's helpful today. I want to start out with some background about the tribe and how our programming has kind of evolved over the years. So the Eastern Band of Cherokee is currently located in Western North Carolina, within the Aboriginal homelands of the Cherokee Nation, which used to span multiple states in the Southeast, covering over 100,000 square miles. And this landscape, ranged from these really rich river bottom lands to high elevation peaks with very diverse natural resources here in the Southern Appalachians that supported a vibrant and rich culture for millennia. Cherokee had villages spread across the region with mounds, a very well-developed language system and system of governments, and a very advanced society that was highly agriculturally dependent with a supplementation from fish, wildlife, and plants for foods and medicines and many other uses. And ultimately, all of the biodiversity found in this region is tied to tribal identity. The cultural values that are associated with fish and wildlife and plants, span many different uses and many different key components of Cherokee identity. So for example, the water beetle in the bottom left corner there is at the center of the Cherokee creation story. Plants and animals were used for different types of tools and associated with language. And of course, provided many ecosystem services for tribes for millennia. And today, these resources are critical to supporting healthy economies at Cherokee, with fishing and wildlife viewing providing millions to the regional economy. But really maintaining the ecological integrity of these resources and the relationship that remains between these resources and the Cherokee people is really challenging in the face of many conservation challenges that I'm sure you're all aware of. And here's a map of today's land base, which consists roughly of about 56,000 acres. Fortunately, much of the Qualla boundary is still in a forested condition. There's still diverse vegetative communities, and as you're probably aware, the unique geologic and topographic history in this area creates a tremendous biodiversity that deserves attention. So balancing tribal needs such as economic development and housing and healthcare with these conservation needs can be very challenging for tribes with limited capacities. Particularly at Cherokee, most of our development opportunities are in sensitive floodplain habitats or upland habitats. So it's a very tricky balance to ensure that tribal member needs are met along with our conservation objectives. So, as with many tribes, tribal lifeways for Cherokee continued to kind of unravel in the late 1800s, early 1900s, and our landscape was put into trust, and the BIA essentially had authoritative management interests over those lands, but really had no resources to effectively manage those lands. So they kind of continued to degrade throughout the early part of the 20th century. In the 1960s, although the tribe continued to practice many traditional lifeways around hunting and fishing and gathering and medicinal resource use, as well as the use of fire, which has always been a very important tool for landscape management. But it wasn't until the 60s that the tribal government really began to engage with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service on some more, Western-based science initiatives with our first trout fishing program. So we partnered with the federal government to start promoting tourism and provide fish for tribal members. So that began to frame kind of a governance structure for natural resource management. But it really consisted of the federal government stocking fish, and there wasn't a lot of actual management going on at the time. And then during the 70s, when these major environmental laws were coming into play, as well as tribal self-governance laws, it really began to kind of build the framework for tribes to start to practice the sovereign management of their resources. And it started creating that framework for eventually translating into policy and funding opportunities for tribes. And that's when really the tribe first started hiring its first ever natural resource-based staff in 1996 with the establishment of our Office of Environment and Natural Resources. So that allowed us to begin really this direct implementation of federal programming and also allow the tribe to start to really exert sovereignty in terms of management of their natural resources. And it wasn't until 2007, though, that the tribe was first able to hire its first biologist. So I was fortunate enough to take that position about 15 years ago, and it was funded through a tribal wildlife grant program. So that's the kind of the sister program to the SWIG program. But again, this is a very limited granting program, and tribes continue to struggle because of the lack of base funding for tribal program development. So these were project funds that were able to be sustained by the tribe, and eventually, due to the tribe's economic development with gaming, they were able to support this position in the longer term. So again, these lack of base funding, and we talk a lot about capacity, is really a huge limitation for tribes and partnerships. But fortunately, the tribe was able to get the staff on board, and really at that time we almost began immediately to start partnering with the state of North Carolina. Shortly after I started, we had some engagement from local biologists in Western North Carolina who had a strong interest in bats. Just prior to me getting started, the Indiana bat was found to roost in Western North Carolina. So there was a lot of folks sprinting to understand bat distribution and bat life history information in the region. So the state was coming to the table, essentially offering training opportunities, but then also had an interest in understanding bat populations in the tribal area. We had already captured through some regulatory surveys an endangered Indiana bat on tribal lands. So we're looking to get more information, particularly considering all the regulatory ties to the Endangered Species Act through the Bureau of Indian Affairs. It was important for us to start to build that internal capacity to survey for bats and to clear projects through the Endangered Species Act. So it was a huge step for the state to reach out, come to us, in a humble manner, and essentially ask us what we need and what they could provide. And it was huge in terms of providing training for staff at the time. Another pretty neat example that soon followed after that first engagement with the state was a partnership around this fish called the sicklefin red horse. It's pretty neat. It's a unique fish to Western North Carolina, only found in 2 drainages, and although it wasn't actually discovered, quote unquote, by science until 1992 to be a unique species. The Cherokee had a name for this fish dating back centuries, translating to wearing a feather. So again, the state came, the biologist approached us with, this kind of joint interest in this fish. This fish was traditionally very important to the tribe and would also influence our landscape if it was to be listed under the Endangered Species Act. So again, building these ground relationships with state biologists who came, with open minds and hearts to understand where we can meet in the middle and prioritize work was super important. So we began a partnership with research and propagation and restoration, and ultimately created a candidate conservation agreement that was the impetus for not listing this fish under the Endangered Species Act, which was obviously very important for the tribe as well as the state. During this time, we continued to kind of partner with the state on project by project interest. The tribe continued to have a lot of need for basic inventory work, so the state continued to help us with this. And it was during this time back in, I believe it was 2013, that North Carolina did reach out to us about the development of their 2015 Wildlife Action Plan. And we're invited to participate in a workshop with other stakeholders at the time, and also provided a summary that was included in the 2015 plan. But again, lack of capacity and lack of time and knowledge around what this Wildlife Action Plan development process looked like was limiting in terms of what we could really contribute to the plan. At the time, we didn't also have a strong government-to-government relationship really with the Wildlife Commission. It was really a field-based relationship. So, that lack of top-level communication also, limited some support for stronger engagement on the planning process. But again, we probably would have really needed a lot more hand-holding at the time. But honestly, though, with our limited capacity, we weren't really staffed to come to the table and be full partners in the process. So since that time, our programs continue to evolve, fortunately, with a lot of gaming resources provided through the tribe for our program development. So we've underwent some planning processes during this time period around 7-8 years ago, and one kind of really influential plan for us was our integrated resource management plan, or legacy plan. And within this tool, it identified a zone of influence for the tribe to engage outside of our current jurisdiction. So it just empowered us with the Tribal Council voice to go out and partner and seek broader conservation objectives outside of just traditional tribal jurisdictions. And we also developed our own wildlife action plan, really focusing on culturally significant species, as well as locally rare species and federally listed species, which was supported again by the hiring of 2 full-time biologists and 2 technicians, which still support our programming today. And fortunately, during this time, we also established a lot stronger relationships with the executive director's office at the Wildlife Commission, which really helped us to enable some broader communication and broader engagement at a higher level, which was very important. For example, right now, we're both the Wildlife Commission and the tribe is working to grow a small elk population in Western North Carolina, which will likely have a limited hunting opportunity in the future, which would both be, co-managed by the state and the tribe. So that's required a lot of engagement. We get calls from the executive director's office when, a rogue legislature wants to throw a hunting tag out there without the right science behind it. So we're able to often, lobby together against those kinds of kind of grenades that are thrown once in a while. We're also working with the state to restore mussels to our watersheds, as well as working on a dam removal project now that's very exciting for us. And then just continuing to do inventory work is really important. So we do, partner with North Carolina biologists both on and off tribal lands to conduct this type of work and try our best to share information. Another important thing to bring up too is in the lower left, you'll see a photograph of ramps. That's a wild onion. The tribe's continuing to do some traditional research looking at harvesting techniques for species like this, traditional harvesting techniques that may ultimately support regulations to help sustain populations on our public lands. So again, there's a lot of room for state engagement to better understand traditional knowledge that could actually have policy and legal implications for harvesting of resources. So this it's kind of interesting. This meeting actually triggered some really great conversations with our state partners. Again, as I mentioned, in 2015, we had some limited engagement, mainly based on capacity issues, but I think we're moving in a really great direction based on some recent planning calls with Cindy and some other wildlife staff. Again, we're talking about, early consultation through the process and opportunities for us to engage in reviewing and commenting on plan components. There's opened up the potential participation on technical review committees if the capacity is available. And some recent really positive discussions around data sharing and access to analysis tools have been important as well. I'm excited about improving our collaboration on defining these conservation opportunity areas in Western North Carolina. And we recently received an America the Beautiful Initiative grant to support broader partnerships with our state and federal partners to do some stronger landscape planning. And then probably most importantly, we really got a full commitment from North Carolina to integrate, our joint priorities into the state wildlife action plan, and looking at possibly even crosswalking and highlighting common objectives throughout the plan, and then ultimately including our Cherokee Wildlife Action Plan as an appendix in the 2025 revision. Paige did an outstanding job of really highlighting, some general rules and lessons learned. I think I'll repeat a few of those, but again, really recognizing and acknowledging this very complicated history between states and tribes is very important. Intergenerational trauma and antagonistic relationships on many issues can shape unrelated issues at times. So I think there's just a really an important need to look at that holistic state tribal relationship. And then also, again, in my experience, starting on the ground and building on the ground relationships through it comes down to personalities in a lot of ways, and people being humble and really finding where we can meet in the middle. And I think there's many tribal resource professionals have to be jacks of all trades, and they're seeking peer-to-peer relationships. So, it's I think many tribes would be open to this. And then again, there's many common priorities with state species lists and tribes. Again, tribes often have more diverse values for these species, which could be culturally significant. So, identifying what those species are with your tribal partners can really translate to really effective projects on the ground. And kind of back to that the project I brought up about sicklefin red horse, focusing on co-producing information. Again, tribes are not stakeholders, they're sovereigns, and coming to the table at the beginning of projects from conception to planning and funding, and ensuring that communication is clear and boundaries are transparent is super important. Patience with tribes is important. I appreciate Paige, bringing up, you may not get a call back right away. Tribal staffs are extremely limited. Often, again, having to be jack of all trades. One of my coworkers who used to work for the Mississippi Band of Choctaw, she was the conservation law enforcement officer, the biologist, the administrative assistant, the grant writer, the everything. So that was one staff member. So again, have some patience with tribes. Try your best to make those connections and give folks some time to respond. I'm really excited too to see the broader tribal relationship with the states grow. We've through the Native American Fish and Wildlife Society, we've been partnering with AFWA to really push for Recovering America's Wildlife Act to get across the threshold. We're hopeful that's a reality over the next few weeks, hopefully. So again, continuing to push for stronger tribal and state relations through professional organizations and is super important, I think, which will, translate down to more effective conservation on the ground. And then the capacity issue obviously is a concern for states. Advocating for stronger tribal and state relations through policies is important. Supporting liaisons, staff training on tribal cultures and governance and sovereignty and natural resource priorities, and then even considering performance metrics and other incentives for staff to improve partnerships could be considered as well. So I think with that, I'll wrap up. Thank you all very much. And again, appreciate the opportunity to be here and look forward to the discussion.
Okay. Thank you, Mike. Appreciate it. Our next speaker is Cindy Simpson, who's the SWAP coordinator for the North Carolina Wildlife Resources Commission.
All right. On the screen share. There we go.
So we're seeing your note slides.
Are you okay? Let me see. Show. I didn't have this problem. Okay, are you seeing the notes or the slides?
Give it a second. I'm seeing this. I'm seeing like 6 slides right now.
Okay. Because it's showing my slideshow. Hold on, let me try this again.
Work rate in practice, right? But
Yeah, it always works in practice.
and it really did.
Yep.
Now we got it.
Now you got it. Okay, great.
Thanks, Cindy.
Thank you. So good afternoon. I'm Cindy Simpson. As I was introduced, I am the Wildlife Action Plan Coordinator at the North Carolina Wildlife Resources Commission, and I've been there since 2010. So I was the one who led the efforts for the 2015 revision. We started that back around the end of 2012, I think. So today I'm going to be very brutally honest about how our 2015 revision cycle fell short in considering Native American culture and natural resource priorities. And I'm also going to share what steps I'm taking to promote greater inclusivity and opportunities for engagement during this next revision cycle. So, did it advance?
Not yet.
Okay. Okay, is it still not advancing?
I'm not seeing it on my side.
Okay. I don't know what's going on here. Hold on a second. Let me try this one more time. All
So
right.
now we're seeing your notes.
Notes again. Yeah. Okay.
If you go to where it says display settings, right there.
Yeah. There we go. Okay. Now. Okay. So I want to start out by
So
explaining.
Cindy, I'm just letting you know, we're still seeing your note slides.
Are you seeing regular slide?
Not yet. Not yet. Sorry.
Okay, I do not know why all of a sudden it is. Why it worked when we tested it.
That's okay. Well, I think if you just want to keep talking, I think we'll definitely understand what's going on.
Are you seeing my revision cycle slide?
We are now.
Okay. I'm sorry, guys. I'm not usually so technologically inhibited.
That's okay. I think Cindy, if you just want to go ahead and just talk, you still have your slides on your side, so you can stop sharing your screen and I think we'll be okay.
Okay. Well, so for the 2015 revision cycle, I proceeded the planning activities with some assumptions that the state and tribal wildlife action plans programs are funded similarly, but are separate programs, and that the Eastern Band of Cherokee Indians, or the Cherokee Nation, as a sovereign nation, they have their own tribal wildlife action plan to address their priorities on their koala boundary, and that WRC staff, as Mike has pointed out, work in the field at the field level frequently, collaborating with them on implementing conservation projects. So WRC staff are aware of shared priorities, and I assumed would be incorporating them as we were working on our revision effort. I also had a very good bit of naivety about Indigenous populations in North Carolina. One was that there are only 2 Native American tribes in North Carolina, the Cherokee Nation and the Lumbee tribe. So while I included contacts for the Cherokee Nation in my plan outreach efforts, I did not have contact info for anyone from the Lumbee tribe. And they are a state recognized tribe, not federal recognized. And another naivety that I was following was that one size fits all for stakeholders and shareholders and partners, and that that's sufficient for outreach and communications. Let everybody know all the same information at the same time to the same extent. I did not consider how tailoring my outreach efforts based on Native American sovereignty, the fact that they have valued cultural resources, and that other underrepresented groups might have their own conservation priorities. So that didn't even figure into any of my planning perspectives. So let me put this into a little bit of a context. As Mike mentioned, there are 574 federally recognized tribes in the U.S., and there are 63 that are state recognized. Those tribes represent a population of more than 5 million people in the U.S. And in North Carolina, we have a population of about 10.6 million people and have the 6th largest Native American population in the U.S. And so Native American populations in North Carolina represents about 1.5% of our state's overall population. And so the North Carolina Commission on Indian Affairs has estimated, based on the latest census information, that there are roughly 184,000 Native Americans in North Carolina. So it's a fairly large population. And naively, I did not expect that there was a population that large. So regardless of the population count, the indigenous people in North Carolina represent thousands of years of heritage and knowledge about the land and the animals. And none of that was taken into account nor taken advantage of to inform our conservation decisions. So let's fast forward from 2015 to now, getting ready for the 2025 revision. And how am I going to address these oversights? So one of the comments that was shared to me when we had our conversation with the Cherokee Nation, as Mike mentioned, was that I should have really made a much greater outreach effort to include not just the Cherokee Nation, but all Native American tribes in the state, and give them a voice for letting us know about their conservation and cultural priorities, and also to encourage greater participation throughout the revision process from the beginning to the end. And so it was never my intent leading the planning effort to exclude anyone. So if someone didn't get a chance to participate, perhaps I wasn't aware of the appropriate contacts or the best method for communicating for them. So I've taken some steps to help address this. And the first one was to create some questions to help lead my research effort, asking what Native American tribes or First Nations exist in the state is probably the most important one. Where do I find information on Indigenous people in the state? Who are the members and how do they want to participate? What are their cultural and natural resource priorities? And how can we incorporate those in our SWOP during revision? So what I discovered in North Carolina, asking that very first question, was that we actually have a state agency called the North Carolina Commission of Indian Affairs, and they work with Native Americans and indigenous tribes in the state. And I would imagine that all states in the U.S. have a similar state level organization. But if not, it may be that the Bureau of Indian Affairs, the federal agency, can tell you what type of organizations are available in your state. So I've already held a meeting with staff at the Commission of Indian Affairs, and received what I think were some great getting started suggestions of making sure that I've adequately addressed these oversights. One recommendation was to attend any public tribal activities or events as a way to personally meet tribal members and to start relationships. And as Paige said, just sending an email and inviting people to have virtual meetings is generally not a very warm and welcoming way to start when you've not had a relationship before. So this month, the 27th annual American Indian Heritage Celebration is going to be held at the North Carolina Museum of History in Raleigh. And it's this Saturday, and I'm planning to attend that. And I'm hoping that I'll get an opportunity to speak with several tribal members and maybe even meet some of the leaders that I can invite them to, if not them, to designate people who have an interest in natural resources and want to work with us. I've also used their website, the Commission on Indian Affairs website, as a source for contact information. They have links to each of the tribes' web pages and information about the leadership. I have a map that I wanted to show. We have 9 recognized tribes in North Carolina. The Cherokee Nation is the only one that's federally recognized, but the others are state recognized. And that includes the Kohari, Kiyawi, and Sora. And I will apologize because I have a very Southern accent and don't always pronounce things correctly. The Haliwa Saponi, the Lumbee, the Meherrin, the Nansemond of the Algonquin, the Occaneechi Band of the Saponi Nation, the Saponi, and the Waccamaw Siouan. And there are also 4 Native American regional associations that are based in the central part of the state. So I'm going to be using this information to build a specific Indigenous peoples contact for outreach, because these are sovereign nations, people from sovereign original nations, and shouldn't be treated as regular stakeholders. And so I'm hoping that by creating this special contact list, keeping it up to date, that it'll help keep me organized and on track for incorporating better outreach. And as Mike said, we've already had our first meeting. And as he pointed out, at a minimum, we'll incorporate their tribal priorities and put their tribal action plan in our document appendix and make reference to it throughout our document to highlight their cultural and natural resource priorities. I have also sent out my very first outreach. I did send an email, but I did that because I was not sure what level of information any of the other tribes and tribal leaders would have about the Wildlife Action Plan. And so I wanted to introduce myself. I wanted to explain what the Wildlife Action Plan is and why we're revising it for 2025. And then to let them know that I want them to be involved in the process. And I did say that I would be following up personally with them within a couple of weeks. So sometime after I attend the event on Saturday. So next week I'll start making phone calls. So I have some recommendations for the other state agencies if you need to increase your tribal participation. As Paige said, start early and be very inclusive. And, find out what tribes are in your state, find out who the leadership is and how to get in touch with them, and try to maintain an open contact. And as Mike said, they may have limited resources, so it might not be that you hear back frequently or quickly from any of your outreach. And then one of the things I'm planning to do right after the first of the year is to schedule listening sessions. And these will be several sessions. I will hold the majority of them as virtual meetings so that I can schedule them a lot more frequently. And these will be listening sessions, and I will be asking for input. How do you want to be involved? What are your priorities? How can we represent that in our action plan? So rather than just a meeting to say, this is what we're going to do, it'll be an open conversation about how can you participate? How do you want to participate? And so taking a minute to just kind of pause and reflect on what North Carolina did in 2015 and what we want to do for our next 10-year revision. I want to be able to continuously provide that outreach for information, and that it's a two-way street for a dialogue. I realize now that I didn't direct all of that outreach appropriately for certain groups, and that underrepresented groups just may not have the capacity to quickly respond or to even know how they want to be involved. So to be flexible on that. And I want to use the 2025 revision as the opportunity to be more inclusive for all of the underrepresented groups that are in the state, not just the Native American populations, but also we have very large Hispanic populations in the state. We have Hmong who are in North Carolina that are heavy resource users for our natural resources. So, and I would like to ask, and I know there's an opportunity today, that if there are states that have been successful in their outreach opportunities, that you share your experiences with us so that we can learn from each other. So with that, we'll take any questions.
Okay. Thank you, Cindy. So we are running a little behind, but not too bad. So I think we do have a little time. So there were a couple of questions which I've been capturing. I don't think we're going to get to all of them right now, but what we will do is follow up on these. So I've been capturing them out of the chat. I think Paige would like to maybe ask you one, if I can, and that we saw. Can you elaborate on sovereign, not stakeholders, and what practices that might change?
Sure. So tribes are recognized as sovereigns because at first contact, it was always recognized by whatever country had sent their explorers or representatives that tribes were inherently sovereign, as in it was recognized that they made their own decisions, and that sovereignty and recognition of sovereignty has never been lost, nor has it ever been ceded or given up by tribes. And that's why they're considered to be sovereign. So we talk about the three sovereigns, which are the federal government, the state government, and tribal governments. And a lot of people don't realize that tribes are essentially an equivalent form of government to a state or the federal government in many regards. So what I would say, and it's already been alluded to in terms of how you reach out to tribes as a sovereign government, is that if you include them in outreach to other stakeholders, such as the general public or nonprofit organizations, I would assume that they would see that as a lack of recognition of sovereignty, and that you're not genuine about engaging with them as a sovereign government. So you need to engage with them directly and not as part of a larger suite of other potential interested stakeholders. So I would also ask Mike if he has any follow-up to that as somebody that actually works for a tribe.
No, that was great. I guess I would just add, I think there's many good examples through different federal agency policies and procedures and perspectives on how they engage with tribes that are available in terms of documents and consultation guidance. So that may be helpful for states to review some of those kind of policies and procedures.
Okay, thanks. So I think I'll ask one more and then we'll do the breakouts. I'm just going to pick one here. For recently recognized tribes or smaller tribes, what's the best way to reach out? We have contact information, but we aren't getting any response. Our VA tribes are getting swamped with consultation requests.
I think Mike might have answered.
Yeah.
Oh, did you, Mike? I'm sorry.
Yeah, I did, and I wanted to put that out there as well. I mentioned I'm engaged with the Native American Fish and Wildlife Society, and that's a national organization of tribal professionals that, works on a variety of conservation and policy issues. So I think, again, I'm a Southeastern Board of Director. There's a Board of Director for every region in the country. So I think that might be a good avenue if you are having trouble reaching out with individual tribal members, working through the Native American Fish and Wildlife Society may be helpful for you.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah, just to add, I put the website for the Native American Fish and Wildlife Society in the chat, and I believe it's in the document. And their mission is to provide communication between tribes, the federal government, and state governments. And so there's nothing barring a state from being a member or from individual state agency staff people from becoming members and engaging with that resource.
Okay, great, thank you. Okay, so Mark is suggesting we do one more, so I'll go ahead and I'll ask one more. And this is coming again from the chat. Has anyone worked with or hired, or does anyone intend to work with or hire private consultants who have a relationship with or are themselves part of a particular tribe when updating their respective swaps? We've done this for other efforts or projects, and I'm just curious if others have experience or insight. So I think this is one for the entire group. Not hearing from anyone out here. Okay. So I think what we're going to do is let's go ahead and let's dive into the breakouts. So the way this is going to work is I'm going to split you all up into virtual groups of roughly 8 or 9 people per room. And what we'd like to do is just ask you, with the time you got, we're going to do this until about 3:20, so about 20 minutes. If you could, just amongst yourselves, what practices can be used to effectively engage tribes and Indigenous people? This is a brainstorming. It's okay if you haven't had a chance to read the document that Mark sent out yesterday, that Paige talked about from the survey. And what we'll do is I'll float around, and if someone in each room could just offer to capture notes, or at the very least the basic highlights, and we'd like to be able to get that afterwards. If we could include that in our notes. So if you have notes, be happy to take them. But if you have highlights, that'd be really good. That we'd like to be able to get is that additional feedback to keep this discussion going. Does anyone have any questions about that before I go ahead and create the breakout rooms?
Can you repeat that question that you want us to discuss? What practices?
Oh, using a round robin, what practices can be used to effectively engage tribes and Indigenous people? So I'll put it in here in the chat before I send you all off. And if you have a little time, please feel free to talk about other observations and experiences. This is a little more open, but this is the key that we're really looking for if we can get your assistance on that. So I'm going to go ahead and I'll create the rooms, and looking forward to hearing your thoughts on the other side. Caroline, I'm sorry, I missed your note.
No problem.
Gonna give it a few seconds. Looks like about 10 more seconds before all the rooms close. So who would have thought that I might have even figured out some of this technology stuff? I can't understand it. All right, well, I want to thank everyone. It did look, as I was floating around the rooms, that there was a lot of good discussion going on. So we have about 10 minutes left, and we will end sharply at that time, I promise. Just want to ask if folks, I'm going to go through the different groups. If you do have feedback or some of these highlights, what practices did you come to? And again, we recognize this is just the start of the process, but what do you think what practices can be used to effectively engage tribes and Indigenous people? Was there someone from group one who'd want to start us off?
Jason, we didn't designate a spokesperson. I think we forgot about that step. I thought one great idea was to do annual meetings with tribes, regardless of whether there were topics at hand, to build relationships and have a meal together. That was an example brought from South Dakota that I thought was kind of neat. And we talked about how building the relationships in a long term, opening the communication channels might be even more important than like their actual work being put into the plan itself. And that emails probably won't work, especially if they're from an unknown person on the state side. Can you guys think of anything else you'd like to add?
I would just add the value of personal relationships, one-on-one at the staff level can't be underestimated. And then when things look too big and complicated, sometimes it's helpful to pick an individual project that people can succeed on and kind of use that as a base for other work.
Thanks so much for that. How about group number two?
Hey, Jason, I volunteered to take notes for folks since they'd heard from me already. We heard that, again, stressing the importance of building relationships at the field level at the start, that there was a benefit that certain tribes may not have the capacity to develop their own plans. And if you might think or assume that they're have the same thing or are doing the same thing, but they may or may not be. And so incorporating their priorities into your plan can sometimes be of benefit to them. They might want to have their own plan or have no plan, but that was an opportunity to provide support for tribal priorities. And that also that there has been a benefit of the agency hiring a tribal liaison that can serve as a resource and a form of communication between the SWAP process and various tribal representatives.
Great. Thank
I'll
you, Dave.
open it up to the group to see if I missed anything.
Yeah. Thanks, Paige. Group number three.
I think that was us. So I took notes and I'll just kind of summarize real quick. So one thing that was brought up was possibly utilizing meetings that are already underway amongst essentially a council of tribal leadership members. If they're already meeting as one large group, that would be one option to meet with everyone at once in person. If states don't already have that set up, but if it is, that's a good thing to try and utilize. But also just we had kind of mentioned that if you are going to meet in person, which seems to be, the best starting place to make connections, would be to pick a convenient place for tribes, maybe a central location to all of them. Not what's convenient necessarily to us, but as we all said, they have the most on their plate. So those were a couple things that we mentioned. The rest of my group, did you want to add anything else?
We had several people in our group who are new to Wildlife Action Plan, and either as new SWAP coordinators or new biologists working on the revision. And so a lot of people did mention that they're kind of in the same boat, hoping that this is a learning process for them. And I was pleased to hear that a couple of states have their own tribal liaison that works within their agency. I think there's definitely a benefit to that.
Great, thanks, Cindy. I'm moving on to group number 4.
I think that was us. If it is, I'll start. I took notes. A couple of things that maybe haven't been said yet. One was kind of engaging at the outset of a process. If you want to meaningfully engage, don't do it at the very end, kind of post hoc. With that, one of the members in our group had said, kind of educating yourself before you go into these meetings. Yes, you want in-person meetings, you want to build a trust and rapport, but she had actually gone to the tribal council and said, what can I read? What can I start with? Because I want to educate myself. And they provided information for her, which I thought was really helpful and interesting because it provides that kind of context historically and politically. Others have talked about finding that key informant or staff member or tribal liaison. Another thing that someone mentioned that was interesting, that hasn't been said, was kind of inviting tribal members to do something, whether it's, I think they mentioned a field biologist doing work on a river that might cross on traditional lands and saying, hey, we're doing this, would you like to come out? And it's been pretty effective to get interest in that. The other last thing maybe to mention is that just being cognizant of bandwidth, right? It's specifically newly recognized tribes might not have, and I think this was mentioned before in the earlier section, but they might not have the bandwidth or the resources or the time or ability to be engaged. And so just being cognizant of that. Other than that, with my group, anything else I missed?
All right, thank you, Mike. Oh, I'm sorry.
I was just gonna say, I thought Anna's suggestion was really good, that if you don't have, if you don't already know, the people that you're trying to approach, if you know of someone that could make that introduction for you, if there's a field staff member or somebody else, that can say, well, this person isn't just trying to check a box, this person is actually interested in engaging with you seriously, then that might be more likely to get you success in getting a meeting or a phone call with them.
All right, thanks. And then last but not least, group number 5.
We also didn't designate somebody, so I can just share some of my takeaways, and if any other group members want to add on, please do. But some of the strategies that I took away from the conversation were, a lot of our group's conversation revolved around kind of the initial stages of building relationships, and also trying to balance inviting participation without expecting too much, and recognizing limited capacity. So some of the things that came up with that were sharing knowledge, for example, about how the SWAP process works, that tribal members might not be familiar with the revision process, as well as kind of proactively, as Mike was saying, like doing some research beforehand and identifying potential opportunities for tribes to be involved, rather than just asking purely an open-ended question and putting it on them to come up with that. And then another recommendation was to involve other state agencies that may already have contact or relationships with tribes in your state or with ancestral lands in your state, such as a cultural resources department. And one specific recommendation was, if there's the financial ability to pay for members of tribes with ancestral lands in your state, if not federally recognized there, to travel and have a meeting in person, and taking that financial burden off of them.
Great, thank you so much. Any other last thoughts? Okay, so I'm just gonna say, if again, just a reminder, if you did take notes, I put my email on the chat. If you could send it over to me, that'd be great. We'll combine them all. Otherwise, we will be asking for some feedback on how these sessions can work better for you. These are for you, so let us know what we can do to make them more effective. And watch for an upcoming one, December 14th. We'll likely cover climate change, which I get to talk at. So hope you all have a good Thanksgiving. And again, thank you all for the time today. Do appreciate everything.